Yeah, everybody, welcome to another episode of my podcast about living faith in a secular culture. I have a guest with me again. This is Dave Wilson from formerly Turkey, and now he's moved to Germany even some short time ago. And I know him from the taco tours we do, which is like an evangelistic team of like artists, dancers, musicians, everything that can be used. And we are doing shows on the streets and talking about Jesus. And that's how I got to know him. No, I knew him a little bit before, but yeah, it's nice to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, I always ask my guests the first question, kind of, how did you find Jesus, or how did you get involved with church or Christian life or whatever you do?
Okay, I was raised, my parents and older sister, who's like my mother almost, because she's like 17 years older than me, became believers at a Billy Graham crusade
Oh,
when I don't think I was born yet. And so they became Christians. And so I was, you could say, raised in a Christian family. My parents were quite simple believers, so I grew up in the church for the most part, and at the same time, I don't believe I had a living faith until I left high school. And I was in Germany, interestingly.
Germany.
Yeah, I was in the army for a couple years in Germany. And that's where, when I joined the army, I asked myself what this Christianity that I've sort of believed, intellectually I believed it, but it had no major impact on my life. I all of a sudden started thinking through it and said, if this is true, it, I should give everything about myself to this, if it's true. If it's not true, what am I wasting my time on this for? I might as well go into the world and live totally for myself and whatever makes me happy. And after researching a bit more, I decided this is true and said, okay, now I'm going to start giving myself to this and giving myself to Jesus. He is who he said he is, and he did what he said he did. And so I'm giving my life totally to him. And so that's how I became a believer. Yes. So that's how it started.
Okay, so this was kind of a more intellectual even approach to it or something. Like you
Yeah.
didn't go to a big crusade or
No,
anything.
it was personal. Yeah, very to myself said, okay, it's time to get serious if this is real. Yeah.
And what made you go to Turkey actually?
Okay. So soon after that, I was still in Germany, but I was hungry for God, so I'd go to any Christian event that was around. And there in Switzerland, there was something like a missions conference. It was to basically for youth to learn more about missions. And so I went to that. And while I was there, I felt a new level of commitment to God. I felt that, basically, I felt, wow, this is even another level. At this conference, I just felt called to God, called to the heart of God in a new way. And sort of the outworking of that was at this conference, it was all about missions. So I thought, what else can I do? I want to go to the place that needs Jesus the most. And that's where soon after that, I was back in America, and I read something about Turkey in a newsletter that gave a short blurb about Turkey that said at that time the population was maybe 50 million people, and there were 5 known Christians in the country. Five, yes. 5 known Christians.
What time was that?
This would have been in the early 80s or so, yeah. So I saw that and thought, wow, this is amazing. I thought there's a place where there's 50 million, a country where there's 50 million people and only 5 Christians. And so after that, Turkey basically occupied my mind, and I thought, well, that's where I want to go, and I want to go where there's the fewest Christians, and I could actually go and have a viable ministry where I could actually share my faith. There's other places that are similar to Turkey, like Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan, but those places were more difficult to get into at the time. So
and also
yeah.
in the 80s, Turkey was it already that way we know it now? Or was it way more secular even in that time?
Actually, yeah, that's an interesting point. That's a hard question. It was more secular in some ways. In other ways, the thing is, the surroundings I went into, the missions community in Turkey, was very, very careful about everything.
Yeah.
So I went in and I sort of had a different attitude and decided I'm going to be out of the box. I'm going to not be careful about everything because I saw the law said you had the freedom to share your faith totally openly. And so I got involved in something called the Bible Correspondence Course, and I felt that needed to be more public. And I can go into that if you want. But yeah, so anyway, that's how I got to Turkey. I went to university for 3 years, finished university, and then went to Turkey after that. And yeah, and lived in Istanbul.
Is it like directly, or did you have like a missions organization you work with, or how did that work in that time?
Okay, a little more detail. So I thought, oh, Turkey is the place I want to go, and it seemed like the mission or the organization that had the most interest in Turkey and had workers, had missionaries there, was a group called Operation Mobilization.
Oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah, quite a big one. And so I joined them to go to Turkey. I got to their conference in Germany, and at the same time, I thought I was going to Berlin because they had a preparation team in Berlin that you usually went to for a year to prepare you to go to Turkey. Mm-hmm. So I was expecting to go to Berlin, and I got to the conference, and I was interviewed, and it was a guy who had been in Turkey for many years, and he asked about my interest in Turkey and where it came from. And when I said I'd been preparing for 3 years to go to Turkey, he was like, "Oh, most people who come and want to go to Turkey at this conference, they decide, oh, I think I'll go to Turkey.
Yeah,
but because you have had this vision and this call for 3 years, we'll just send you directly there." And I was, yeah, absolutely. That's where I want to go. So I'd rather go there directly than go to Berlin for a year. So that's how I got to Turkey and lived in Istanbul.
Okay. What was that first time there? What was the challenges maybe for you in that time, and what did you basically do?
Yeah, well, the first year and a half was mostly focused on learning the language. So I went to a couple different schools and spent a lot of time with Turks and friends I made. I just spent a lot of time with them to learn the language. But I also got involved in what I mentioned before, the Bible Correspondence Course, in doing practical things. And got involved in that a bit. But my major ministry, you could say, for the first year and a half was learning the language.
And also getting to know the culture and stuff like this? Yeah,
getting the culture. In my brain, it's just, I think, the way a lot of people think when they want to go to a country and they want to reach people. You want to, as much as possible, adapt to their way of doing things. And so when I first went for my first year or so, my attitude was everything Turkish is right, the right way to do it. And everything is not the Turkish way, is the wrong way to do it. And that's not totally true, but by adapting that mindset, I was able to go in and, okay, I'm going to do things the Turkish way.
Okay.
And then after a year or two, you think, okay, this thing isn't that important. I don't need to follow the Turkish way. If I do, it's okay. If I don't, it's okay. And so certain things, I still always did the Turkish way that I felt were important to them. Other things I could leave behind. It wasn't a major thing in Turkish culture.
Can you think of something that really sticks to your mind? Think of something.
Yes.
You learn or do in a way that's not your culture, but you just did it.
Right. One thing is you wouldn't sit with your leg crossed, across from somebody with your foot facing them. That is very impolite. So you would either sit with like this. I could probably sit this way. It's okay because my foot's facing that way, away from you. Yeah. But if it's facing you and you're a Turk, then I actually did that one time. I remember one time I was on a ferry boat and I was really tired and I put my foot up, not recognizing there was a guy nearby. And he got upset at me and said, "What are you doing with your foot up?" And it was very negative, a very negative sign to do that. So that's one thing practically. Another thing that one of the things that I changed a bit was if it's a holy book, you would never put it on the ground or disrespect that. Or I thought there's things I heard before I went, this is not good, this is not good.
Yeah.
But then I tested them. And certain things, like I said, I remained. And one was I wouldn't throw the Bible on the ground, or I wouldn't have the Quran or their book. I wouldn't put it on the ground or anything. But one of the things that I heard was that you shouldn't write in the holy book. They think you're changing, but I heard that they think you're changing it by writing it.
When you make some notes or something.
Right, when you make notes, yeah.
Mark stuff.
But I decided, I felt, no, there's no problem with that. I show that, and I'm showing them that it's not. They can clearly see it's not changing it. Mm-hmm. It's just me making notes about different verses.
Yeah.
Another thing I found out is you were told you should never go in the house of a woman alone. If she answers the door and invites you in, you shouldn't go in. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I did for many years, all the time, was visit contacts around the country who were interested in the Bible or in Jesus. And often I'd go to their house and I'd knock on the door, and they knew who I was. It wasn't like I was a total, I had written them before that I was coming,
of course.
Usually. And sometimes they wouldn't be home when I came, and the wife or some woman would be there. And they'd always invite me in. And okay, I'll go in. And there was never I never felt any negative aspect of that after I'd done it a lot. It's just you hear things, and I'm sure in certain contexts that it's not a good thing, but I found that was something I could leave behind and not follow totally. So there's, the Bible, writing in it I felt was okay, but still I wouldn't put it on the ground or put it in a place that's disrespectful. I wouldn't, for example, I wouldn't put it in the bathroom, in the toilet.
Oh.
In their thinking, you don't pray. I had people argue with me that you shouldn't pray in the toilet because it's a spiritual thing, and the toilet is a dirty place.
Yeah.
And so I know in the West, a lot of people leave Christian literature in their toilet, or there might be a New Testament.
There you have time to.
Yeah, you're exactly. But I found Turks felt that was not Turkey. Those who were stronger Muslims would react to that and say, "How could you read the Bible in the toilet? And how could you pray in the toilet?" So very interesting. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
In our cultures, maybe there's not so much anymore like secular, holy distinction.
Right.
Everything can be a holy thing or a secular thing, depending how you feel it, basically.
Yeah, that's my nature
the best
too.
worship times when you are on the pot.
Yeah. Well, that and my nature is more that direction.
Yeah.
But I needed to adapt to some degree to the Turkish mindset and way of doing things.
What happened after that? How can you explain a little bit the road until what we have now?
Yeah. Okay. So my ministry was totally the Bible correspondence course. It was these.
Oh yeah, maybe explain this a little bit.
So that it's a course that's done through the post, but it was very few people doing it. In a year, you'd have a few hundred people, and one of the ways, and the main way to get those contacts was an organization in America called Friends of Turkey that sent gospel letters. So it'd be letters sent from actually not just America, but Europe and Australia and different places. They were letters with Christian literature and then to Turkish addresses that were found anywhere, but mostly in phone books. And the phone books would have the person's name and their address. And so they would get these phone books, cut them up, and send the addresses to people all around the world who would then take the gospel literature that also came with the addresses that were sent to them, and they would send them to Turkey. They would pay the postage. And it was a ministry of sending letters into Turkey.
But from outside, it was not really in Turkey.
Right, outside of Turkey. Yeah. And we were the follow-up mechanism for that. So one of the negative things about it is because we were so security conscious at that time, the address that people sent it to was in Switzerland. So they'd get the gospel letters. If they were interested, they'd write to Switzerland, and then we would eventually get the letters back from Switzerland. And it was quite a long process. And one of the problems with that was because the address was in Switzerland, their assumption was, these are Swiss Christians or foreign, well, they were coming from all over the world, so they would think these are foreign Christians who are sending these letters into Turkey. So that was a good thing, basically. But what we found is many of the people who wrote in had false motives.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the European address, they would often ask, I would love to be a Christian, but you have to bring me to Europe and find me a Christian wife.
Yeah, something like that.
Or you need to get me out of Turkey, because I can't be a Christian in Turkey. That's impossible. This is a Muslim country, and so I can't live here as a Christian. So we had all these false motives of people. So probably half the people who wrote in, even though they may have started, and there were those who started as if they were really interested, and we later found out they weren't, but they were better at hiding it longer.
Yeah.
Others just wrote immediately and said, oh, I'd love to be a Christian, but can you get me a Christian wife? And,
that's really obvious.
Yeah. So one of the big things that I did, I said, we have to get an address in Turkey. But all the advice I got was, oh, you can't do that. It's too dangerous, because then it's in Turkey. They're going to immediately find you, and you're going to be in trouble. You'll either be thrown out of the country or put in jail, or all this stuff could happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, that's what I did. I got an in-country address. And then we had teams come in who went door to door, and would, at nighttime usually, and drop Christian literature in post boxes in houses. And that was another way to get interest. But we brought it into Turkey, and immediately we noticed one thing was that the numbers of people writing in for false motives went way down. And so that was an immediate positive thing. But still, the numbers writing in a year would be a few hundred people. And I had a longing to see more people contact us and write in. So along with the in-country inbox, I was trying to think and pray about other ways to find interested people in Jesus or the gospel. And so I decided to go to Christian newspapers. I'm sorry, not Christian newspapers, secular newspapers, the top newspapers in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to them and asked to put an ad in the newspaper saying, would you like to know more about Jesus, or would you like to get a free New Testament, or something like that?
Like really straight.
Yeah, very straight. Yeah, very straight. And over again, it was rejected. So no newspaper would accept it. But then I thought, well, why don't I try magazines? So I tried a national magazine, and it was a very leftist magazine, very basically a communist magazine. And so I went to them, and they were wonderful. They reacted to me very positively, and in a sense, they felt we were like brothers and sisters, because we were both fighting a common enemy, Islam. And they're thinking,
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So normally left-wing people are really against Christians.
Yeah.
In this context, it's connecting. Even like atheist people and Christians oftentimes in this context have really not in common.
Yeah, it was great. So and in fact, to the degree I thought, if I wasn't a Christian, I'd probably become one of them. They felt so loving and nice, and they not only said, we'll do the ad, we'll design it for you and make it really nice. And so they started putting in our ad. I'm trying to think if it was a monthly newspaper or a weekly magazine. I think it was a weekly magazine. Anyway, of course, our response went way up from hundreds to 1,000, over 1,000, maybe 2,000 people a year. Then we got it in a more center, not a left or a right so much, but something like a major magazine. In Germany, it's probably like Spiegel. Is that your one of the big magazines?
Yeah, that would be one. It's a little
something like
leftist, but not.
Oh, okay. This one would be
like a communist magazine.
Right.
It's a little bit left-wing.
Okay, this one would be fairly center, more of a common news magazine, and they accepted it. And so our response went from a few hundred to about 5,000 responses in a year, just because of that. And it was true that when the postbox came into Turkey, we would have more problems, but it was worth it. And so I got in trouble with the police for various things through the years, and different parts of the country, and follow up, or in Istanbul. And once I was picked up at the postbox and deported from the country at that point. And I was deported several times, but that was one I'd forget. No, that wasn't the first time. But anyway. That happened a few times too.
Yeah, what happened later?
Okay, yeah, I can get into them more.
Yeah.
So the big thing with the correspondence course is finding ways that I felt we needed to find various ways to find interested people in the gospel. Another one of the things was I saw walking down a main street in Istanbul on the weekend was a people putting up book tables, and they weren't professional. They weren't like these cool book stands that are professional and legal.
Mhm.
They were guys who just came out and set up tables on the weekend, and this whole street became a book, basically a place to sell books of all types. And so I thought, man, maybe we could do something with this. So I went up to a guy and said, what do you do to be able to do this? He said, no, we don't need anything. We're allowed to do this on weekends.
Cool.
And so we bring our tables and set up. So the next weekend I decided, okay, I'm going to set up a table, have Christian literature, tracts, New Testaments, booklets. And we immediately made it very easy to buy something. If you buy any booklet, and we'd have books that were 10 pages. Mm-hmm. If you buy anything, and even that we would reduce the price to almost nothing. If you buy it, you get a free New Testament. And so we started, and we were the most popular book table on the street. And we did it every Sunday, and people would come all day long. And it was usually packed with people, and getting people talking with us and arguing with us, and we'd get out 100, 150 New Testaments every Sunday, and which meant hundreds of books and literature and many conversations. Okay, that was one thing. And another thing was something that eventually became where we're at now is taco. And so that was a vision I had from the time I was in university, where I saw the power of, at that time, music to reach people's hearts and reach people's emotions. It went past the intellectual and went right to the heart. And so I thought, it just was planted in my brain when I was in university. This would be cool to use cross-culturally. It's an international language. It speaks across cultures. And so it stuck in my mind, but it took me maybe 6 or 7 years before I got to the point where I thought, okay, I'm going to make this happen. And so I went to a couple festivals in the U.S., big music festival, Christian music festivals, and I talked to the artists after the concert. I'd find them, and these were all the big, well-known artists at the time, Christian artists. And over again, I get this exact same response. We'd love to come, but you have to pay our airfare. You have to pay our expenses when we're there. We want to stay in a hotel, blah, blah, blah. Basically thousands of dollars I'd have to raise to bring them. Yeah. And in one way, unfortunately, I decided to do that. But fortunately, it eventually bore fruit. But at first, I decided, okay, I'll make one of these great, well-known artists. I'll find them and bring them. And so a guy named Greg X. Waltz, who was the former singer of one of the biggest bands at the time, was Petra. And he had left Petra and started his own band. Mm-hmm. And I forget now how I got in contact with him, but he was coming on a tour to Europe, to Germany actually. And he said, well, we can reduce the fees a lot. All you have to pay is our round trip ticket from Germany to Turkey. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And I was able to raise the money from different sources, several $1,000s. I think I raised something like $7,000 and brought them for all. That's a lot. That's a lot. But I made it happen. So they came. I found a nightclub, one of the top nightclubs in Istanbul for rock music, would be more of a pop rock nightclub. Very, very nice club. And they agreed to take them and pay for their, I'm trying to think, I think they paid for part of their food and some of their expenses. But we still had to raise thousands. We had to pay for their airfare and a few other things. So we still shelled out, $5,000 or something. And so they played 5 nights in a nightclub. And unfortunately, I said, okay, we did from the beginning. We did it had a booklet we made up of their picture on the front and the lyrics to some of their songs translated into Turkish. And then we had a little survey in the back that they could sign up for more information about the band. And that way we could follow up if they were interested. That's cool. Yeah, it was cool. But unfortunately, the band was so afraid of Turkey, being in Turkey. They didn't say any. I said, you're free to say whatever you want. We didn't have translation at the time. I didn't think of that, but you can say whatever you want. And they were so scared they not only didn't say anything, if their song said something like Jesus in it, they would change it. Like Jesus loves you, they would change it to He loves you. Just in case, if they heard Jesus, they might get upset, so. Anyway, so all of this happened, they left, and I just felt like this was a failure, that this wasn't what I expected it to be. And I realized that it wasn't from God, so to speak. It was more me making it happen. That I had made this happen no matter what. I was going to make this happen. And therefore, the result was I said, I'm not going to make this happen again. If you want it to happen, God, you will have to do it. And I prayed and said, okay, God, it's yours. And then for 3 or 4 years, nothing happened. I had no thought of going forward with this. And then at a conference that I was at in Holland, I met a guy by the name of Bill Drake, who was a Christian artist who played keyboards and sang, pop rock music. But mostly he went around the world to Christian colleges, churches, and used his gift of music to raise missions awareness. He'd go into churches and Christian colleges and get people to get interested in missions. Mm-hmm. But I sat down with lunch at him one day, and we got talking, and I mentioned my vision of what eventually became Taco. And he said, wow, I'd be interested in that because I'd like to do more evangelism. And I thought, okay, great. But I didn't push it. I didn't say, okay, when can you come? I just let it go. And he said, 6 months later, he called me and said, I'm ready to come. And that was the beginning of Taco. Really the beginning, because he came. We put together artists he paid his own way. I said, you have to pay your own way. And then we found missionaries who had been musicians in their past. So we put together a band of missionaries.
That were in Turkey.
Right. One guy was a church planter in a city 3 hours south of Istanbul, and he'd had a rough year, and he wanted to be a session drummer in high school. Mm-hmm. We had another guy who was a guitarist in bands in California, and who was a guitarist, really good lead guitarist. And then we found a bass player from Campus Crusade, an Australian bass player, and we toured in southwestern Turkey, and it became the prototype, the real what Taco would become. We did shows we did one show in the biggest nightclub in southwestern Turkey. We did an amphitheater in Izmir, Turkey. We did a cultural center in Bursa, Turkey. We did several shows, and we saw a few people make professions of faith. And it became what eventually became Taco. And one of the things about Taco that is very interesting is because of the bad first experience I had, I decided we will never try to make things happen. We will never try to bring bands. We will never try to go to any other countries unless we're invited. We won't try to do anything unless it's basically God showing us clearly this is what we're supposed to do. And we're not going to try to make anything happen, try to get any artist to come. It's going to have to happen organically.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Of course.
So the next year he came back again, and then a YWAM band from Hungary came. And then people started hearing about what we were doing, and we started getting artists who heard about it and would say, I want to come. And it was music for the first few years. And then eventually a mime group came from that were full-time mime. They did full-time mime, so they were really good. And they came. One of the girls who came on that team, her boyfriend was the world champion unicyclist. And she eventually married him. And within 2 or 3 years, they also contacted us again and said, we'd like to come. And that developed a relationship that went on for 15 years of them touring with us constantly. And it just became like a snowball that artists, and then all of a sudden, all these artists, different types of artists of anything you can imagine. So world champion unicyclists, we've had clowns, we've had illusionists, we've had lots of dancers, lots of basically any art form you could think of, we've had now. And it just exploded. And then before long, other countries asked us to come. And so up until now, we've been in 20 countries. And again, the focus has always been Muslims. So we decided from the beginning, we'll go to other places if we're asked to go. But the focus and the target audience would be Muslims.
What's the challenge maybe in reaching Muslim people? What are ideas of how to reach them? How do they think?
Okay.
Maybe it's maybe a too long question. You could
Yeah.
do a whole episode about that. But.
Well, I can. That's a very. You're right. That's a very wide question because just like there's different types of any people group or any type of people or any religion, there's all different types of. You have your nominal Christians and you have your serious Christians. You have your different denominations and you have the Catholic and Orthodox and Protestant churches, and Islam is much the same. One country, a good example would be Albania, where we just went. We were in Albania 2 weeks ago with the team, and Albania is very open because communism. It was a center of communism for many, many, many years until about 30 years ago. And then with the fall of communism, the thing that communism had done, it had wiped out religion. Mm-hmm. So even though Albania is a majority Muslim country, it basically took out the foundation of Islam, so that people there are a lot more open and they don't have that foundation, even though they may call themselves Muslims. It's a much more liberal type of Islam. So when we go there, we have all types of fruit. So we're able to do concerts and events totally openly in city squares or wherever we go, and preach totally openly. And the people are also open. So you have everything that's open. The government's open for you doing it, and people are open to accept the message comparatively to most Muslim countries we go to. So we've seen over 20 churches, and we work with Albanian church planters and missionaries who are Albanians. It's a Albanian mission. And they use us not just to evangelize, but to start churches. So we've seen about 20 plus Albanian churches started.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So that's one extreme. Mm-hmm. We're going to Egypt in a couple of weeks, and Egypt is very different. The people are actually quite open. There's been quite a number of Muslims that have come to faith in the last few years. But it's illegal to evangelize Muslims. So we have to find unique and creative ways to have our shows. So one of the things is we found Sudanese, there's a huge amount of Sudanese refugees in Egypt, around 4 million Sudanese refugees who are Muslim background. But even though it's illegal to evangelize Egyptians, it's not illegal to evangelize Sudanese. So we have concerts and shows for almost all Sudanese refugees. And they're quite open, and we've seen quite a bit of fruit of them coming to faith in Egypt. Another way is we have events where we advertise very clearly, these are for Christians. This is for Christians. But in doing it, we put on like the posters or whatever. We make it sound like this is the coolest thing ever. These are the best. These guys are phenomenal. And
like some Muslims might sneak in.
Yes. So once the Muslims come to a show like that, we're okay.
Yeah.
It's on them.
Yeah.
And so it's on them. If they come in and they get evangelized and we share the faith with them, we're okay. Mm-hmm. So there's all these type of things we are always trying to do. And also a lot of Christians have Muslim friends, and they know they can bring them because they're not going to be upset at them. They're more, again, Muslims who are more open-minded, and they will come. So we encourage Christian friends to bring their Muslim friends. And so there's all these different ways. But at the same time, Egypt is very much more closed than Albania. We can't go out on the streets. We can't go in city squares. It has to be almost always indoors, mm-hmm. or in a contained atmosphere where our school, sometimes we're in a Christian school, we're Muslim. Okay, that's another way. We go to Christian schools where they have the best education in Egypt. So, and the Muslims are willing to send their children there. And so we're able to evangelize Muslim kids because they're in a Christian school.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So there's all these different.
Don't really say anything because they know it's a Christian.
Yeah,
school.
I mean, we still can't, really directly say, do you kids want to follow Jesus? But we can share the message, and how Jesus has changed our lives, so they hear about that, and that's another way. So there's all these different ways we try to go around the law to make it happen. And then there's Turkey, that's sort of in between. We actually are able to get permissions or go out without permission and do events on the streets and in city squares or wherever. And we may get in trouble to some degree, but they may stop the show if there's complaints. But we usually know what area to go in that's not the more Islamic areas. And so in Turkey, the government is open, but we see the least fruit of probably anywhere we go. So we see what we want to do there is proclaim the gospel to people who've never heard it before and plant seeds. And we see some fruit. We've seen a couple of churches started through our efforts. But for the most part, Turkey is a seed planting ministry where we're trying to share the gospel to thousands of Muslims.
Yeah. It's a hot nation. Yeah, the Turkish people are kind of
yeah.
If rather I felt like it was half. You have half of the Muslim people that would say I'm Muslim, or maybe everyone would say I'm kind of Muslim,
Right.
but half of the people are really secular.
Yeah.
At least in the bigger cities.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
You're not going, and we very rarely have a problem if we're in the right places in the city. The more secular neighborhoods, like Kadıköy, where you stayed when you were there, that's quite a secular area, and where we do a lot of spontaneous street outreaches there, and we usually don't have a problem. And in Turkey, the police, again, the law is on our side generally, even though we're doing, in a sense, not legal street outreaches. We know what we can get away with. And the most they usually do, they might call us in for questioning and then let us go usually. But the most they usually do is act on complaints. Even police who walk by and we're doing our event, often or usually not do anything themselves. But if there's somebody, eventually when we get to sharing the message, often there's somebody who may go to the police and complain, and they act on complaints. So they may come and close us down if there's a complaint, and then we just move on to another area.
Okay.
We've learned because nobody has ever got at least nobody has gotten deported from the country or in a taco event. Nobody's ever gone to jail for it. The most that usually happens is we get closed down.
Have you gone to jail several times?
I have, but it's usually not in the context of at a show. We've been taken in to the police many times and questioned, and our names are taken down. And because often what happens is somebody complains. When somebody complains, then the police act more like real police, and they take you, and you have to go in. The guy who's complained goes in, and he files an official complaint.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, that could have contributed to my eventual inability to get into Turkey, because my name's on the books as this Christian missionary. So that's why I'm probably not in Turkey now. But I've done so much through the years with the correspondence course and Taco that my name's all over the place. But until recently, it wasn't acted upon.
You are doing things pretty boldly. Like you would preach the gospel in nations where people say, "Oh, you cannot do this, and you cannot be open with that," and blah blah blah, and things like that.
Yeah.
How would you encourage people to have this lifestyle? Why should we have this, and why should we approach this? And how can you, maybe even some people would say, if you are preaching boldly the gospel, you are not being cultural sensitive, something like this. What would you say to these people then?
Well, I've seen. I would say on this cultural sensitive issue, I would say it's more important to be culturally relevant. And if we're doing our events, while we're doing whatever we're doing, I encourage our teams to be our own biggest critics, so that we always want to change the message to be the most relevant, to be the most to reach the hearts of the people. I mean, we have groups come, which like No Longer Music, who I know that they're not overly culturally sensitive, but they're very relevant because everybody stops to watch them because they're so weird and strange and unique. And that's always going to attract people to be in whatever culture. So I don't always try to change everything about a group coming. I see what they do, and if it's something that I know is going to be really culturally negative, I might change it, which they're a good example. There's a thing they do in their show where it's almost like a rape scene. And I knew that had to change. Interestingly, not because of the Muslim culture. It's because of the Christians that we work with that the problem comes in. Interesting. It's not, we don't have to change it. We never felt we had to change it for the people that are our target audience. We had to change it for the Christians who get upset when you
Oh yeah, yeah.
have a scene like that.
Like in Egypt, people can't dance.
There's
Because of the
okay. That's a
Christians.
more real relevant one right now because we're trying to get there, and yeah, we hope to be there in around the 10th of October. We hope to be in Egypt, and we're running into this again because we have dancers going, and it's a lot more difficult to get events when we have dancers, unfortunately, because it's the same exact thing. There is no problem with our target audience. They love dancing, and the people we would reach would be the more secular Muslims, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So they would love it, and it would hit their hearts. But unfortunately, it's the Christians who think dancing is a sin. Well, interestingly, it's not a sin for the guys, but it's a sin for the girls. So there's no problem if we have male dancers, but if we have female dancers, we have a problem. So we deal with this wherever we go. But so that's an example of being culturally sensitive and culturally relevant, and where culturally sensitive is usually not an issue unless it's something extreme. But we always want to be grading ourselves and critiquing ourselves and getting better at what we do. And
yeah, that's maybe the point. If you have someone that does something that's really not, sometimes people have no clue. They just come to an outreach and they do whatever they do.
Right.
Maybe then after one times they do it, you have to tell them, okay, please, you cannot say like this. It doesn't appeal to the people.
Right.
And then it's okay if they.
I mean, from time to time, we have to tell like the girls to dress in a certain, maybe not as openly as they would in Europe or the West. But yeah.
Yep. But the second point, how would you, was the first one?
Yeah.
How would you encourage people to take that risks and not be shy about their faith? Or what? But how can you get there? Or what? Yeah. How would you encourage people that listen to?
Well, I would say God's heart is for the hurting and the lost, and the most lost and the most hurting. And there's no people group that are more unreached and more lost than the Muslims. I think that needs to touch your heart initially. And what I would say is, going is the hard thing. What you do once you go is something that's learned. And going in the context of community is ideal. And on our teams in Turkey, for example, that we've had in the past, when we get new people, everybody isn't a crazy evangelist who's always out on the streets and wants to share the gospel. I'm one of those who isn't like that. I'm not naturally the guy who wants to go out and confront people in any manner, whether it's with the gospel or any other way. But if you do it in community, so I would encourage you not to go, the Muslims are lost, I need to go there and just take off on your own. You would probably not make it. But if you go in some type of community, then you have others around you that are encouraging you. When we go out on the streets, on our teams, people who come, I say, you have to go out with us. I mean, you have to, that's what you're here for. You need to go out with us and do, often their art form, and they do that, and they don't have to do anything else. Or we have certain people who go out with us just to share the gospel. They're not like me, who aren't any type of artist, but they go out, and you have to go with us. But I don't care if you just stand there, go out. And invariably, they eventually start sharing their faith, or they'll start handing out literature. And then eventually the people will come to them and start asking them questions. And before long, I've seen people who are shy and would never do that. But because they go out in community, they're transformed into always wanting to do that, whether they're in community or not, because they learn how to do it. They learn it's easy and it's simple, and there's nothing to be afraid of. And even in a Muslim context, very, very rarely are you going to get in trouble for one-on-one event. If you go up to a Muslim in Turkey, for example, you can talk to anybody about your faith. And there's never going to be a problem with the police or anything, because it's one-on-one. They might get upset at you, but they're not going to turn you in for anything because it's just a conversation.
Yeah.
So I would say go to the most unreached people in the world, and go in community and be a part of a team, of a family who are doing this together. And people who are doing that with us now, who are just joining us on this recent tour, who are coming for longer term, are blown away, and I know that they are just having a blast. And it's not always a blast. And there's discipline where they have to learn the language and stuff.
Of course.
But they're initially coming on the tours, and then they in November they'll be going. A couple of them will be going to Istanbul, and will be spending a lot of time learning the language and the culture, and more of the stuff where they really have to study, and not the fun stuff of being out on the streets reaching people. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for being in the podcast. I will put some links to some videos that I made of taco tours in Germany in the description, so you can see what's actually happening here. And
yeah, I think you'll like it. I'm really impressed with the present team. So hopefully, Simeon will put some of that on. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep. Thank you. See you.
You're welcome.